Hello and welcome to Opera Road Trip, OperaVision's two-year podcast series exploring opera from its 16th century Italian roots to its role today across Europe and beyond. I'm your host, Sebastian Schwarz, and today, in our 10th episode, join me in exploring opera in Belgium and for a conversation about new operas with Christina Scheppelmann, CEO and Artistic Director of La Monnaie in Brussels, and the British composer Iain Bell, on the occasion of the recent world premiere of his newest opera, Medusa. But, as usual, let's first listen to some music before we get ourselves an overview over the historical facts of opera in Belgium. Framing our overview will be two excerpts from recordings by Belgian-born composers generously made available by Alexandre Dratwicki, the artistic director of Palazzetto Bruzzane in Venice, which, as we heard in our previous episode, is dedicated to researching, publishing and promoting the largely forgotten repertoire of the French 19th century. The first excerpt is an aria from Thésée by François-Joseph Gossec, who lived from 1734 to 1829. And the second is the duet De ton époux voilà donc le partage from La Caravane de Caïr by André Ernest Modeste Crétry, who lived from 1741 to 1813. When people think of operatic nations, Belgium is rarely the first country that comes to mind. And yet, few countries in Europe have a relationship with opera so deeply intertwined with politics, language, identity, and nationhood itself. Belgium may be geographically small, but operatically it sits at the crossroads of French, Dutch, German, Austrian, and Italian traditions. And for more than 3 centuries, Brussels in particular has been one of Europe's major operatic capitals. The first recorded opera performance on the territory of present-day Belgium took place in Brussels in 1650. It was Ulisse all'Isola di Circe by the Italian composer Giuseppe Zamponi, performed at the court of the Habsburg governors of the Spanish Netherlands on the occasion of the marriage celebrations of King Philip IV of Spain. Italian opera arrived here first as a court spectacle, lavish, international, and politically symbolic, much as it had in Vienna and other Habsburg centers. At that point, Belgium as a nation did not yet exist. The region was governed successively by Spanish and Austrian Habsburg rulers, and opera culture developed largely through imported Italian and French repertoire. Brussels became increasingly important during the late 17th century. In 1682, the city opened its first public opera theatre, the Opéra du Quai aux Foins, where works by Lully and Italian composers were presented to paying audiences rather than only at court. The decisive step came in 1700 with the opening of what would become Belgium's most important operatic institution, La Monnaie, or De Munt in Dutch. The theatre was built on the site of the former Royal Mint after the French bombardment of Brussels in 1695 had devastated much of the city. Its very name, La Monnaie, literally the mint, preserves that memory. The first documented performance here was Lully's Atthus in November 1700. Throughout the 18th century, Brussels became one of the leading operatic cities north of the Alps. Contemporary observers ranked La Monnaie just behind Paris among French-language theatres. French opera dominated, especially the works by Lully and Rameau, and later the Liège-born composer André Ernest Modeste Grétry, who would become one of the most influential figures of French opéra comique before the Revolution. Italian opera also flourished, particularly during the Austrian Habsburg period under Archduchess Maria Elisabeth, sister of Emperor Charles VI. Between 1727 and 1730, Brussels briefly became one of the most important centers for Italian opera north of the Alps. Entire opera seria productions, complete with imported singers, elaborate stage machinery, and repertory drawn directly from Italy and Vienna, arrived in Brussels almost as quickly as they appeared in Venice or Naples. Works by the leading composers of the age, including Johann Adolf Hasse, Leonardo Vinci, and Geminiano Giacomelli, were staged here shortly after their Italian premieres, demonstrating how internationally connected Brussels had become. One particularly striking example was Hasse's Sesosträte, performed in Brussels in 1728, soon after its Italian success. The city also mounted productions such as Vinci's Didona Abbandonata, based on a libretto by Pietro Metastasio, whose texts were rapidly becoming the dominant literary foundation of opera seria across Europe. Language would become one of the defining tensions of Belgian operatic life. Opera in Brussels was overwhelmingly performed in French, the prestige language of the elite, even though much of the population spoke Dutch. One fascinating early exception was the Opéra Flamand, founded in the 1770s inside La Monnaie itself. It attempted to create professional opera and theatre in Dutch, an unusually progressive idea at the time. The experiment was artistically successful, but politically fragile and did not survive long after its founders departed. Still, it marked one of the first attempts to make opera culturally local rather than simply imported prestige entertainment. Belgium's most famous operatic moment came not on stage artistically, but politically. On the 25th of August 1830, during a performance of Daniel Auber's La Muette de Portici at La Monnaie, Brussels erupted into unrest that would become the Belgian Revolution. The opera itself tells the story of a Neapolitan uprising against Spanish rule. During the patriotic duet Amour sacré de la patrie, sacred love of the fatherland, audience members reportedly became so inflamed that many left the theatre and joined demonstrations in the streets. Within weeks, revolution spread, and by October, Belgium had declared independence from the Netherlands. The story has become almost mythological, an opera causing a revolution. Historians today usually stress that political tensions were already explosive. Economic crisis, religious divisions, and resentment against Dutch rule had been building for years, but the performance undeniably became a catalytic symbol. Few opera houses anywhere in the world can claim to have played such a direct role in the birth of a nation. Ironically, the opera that ignited Belgian independence was written not by a Belgian composer, but by a Frenchman. So when does opera actually become Belgian? One answer lies in the emergence of Belgian-born composers during the 19th century, above all César Franck, born in Liège in 1822. Though Franck spent most of his career in Paris and is often associated with the French tradition, his success became an important source of cultural confidence for the young Belgian state. Belgium never developed a single national operatic style comparable to Verdi's Italy or Wagner's Germany. Instead, its musical culture remained multilingual and cosmopolitan, shaped simultaneously by French, German, and Italian influences. That openness later helped produce one of the most influential opera administrators of the late 20th century, Gérard Mortier. As director of La Monnaie in the 1980s and early 1990s, Mortier transformed the house into one of Europe's leading centers for contemporary and intellectually ambitious opera production. He championed directors' theatre, new music, and politically engaged programming, helping shape the aesthetics of modern European opera far beyond Belgium itself. La Monnaie also became closely associated with the Belgian composer Philippe Bosmans, whose operas premiered in Brussels from the 1980s onward, helped establish the house as one of Europe's leading centers for contemporary opera. Works such as Reigen, Julie, and Pinocchio became landmarks of modern European music theatre and helped define the artistic identity of the house well into the 21st century. Today, Belgium's operatic landscape is built around three major institutions. First, of course, La Monnaie, the Federal Opera House in Brussels, internationally renowned for adventurous programming, contemporary work, and innovative staging. Second, Opera Ballet Vlaanderen, formerly known as Vlaamse Opera, operating across the historic opera houses of Antwerp and Ghent. Antwerp's operatic tradition reaches back to the 17th century, with public performances documented as early as 1661. The current Antwerp Opera Building opened in 1907, while Ghent's opera house dates from 1840. The Flemish company reflects Belgium's linguistic and political evolution. Opera here became part of a broader cultural emancipation in Dutch-speaking Flanders, while the company today combines international repertory with contemporary staging and interdisciplinary work. Third, Opera Royale de Wallonie-Liège, based in Liège, the major francophone opera institution of Wallonia, long associated with the French and Italian repertoire. And beyond the major opera houses, Belgium also hosts influential independent music theatre companies, among them Muziektheater Transparant in Antwerp, led for many years by CEO and artistic director Guy Koelen. Founded in 1987, Transparant has become known internationally for interdisciplinary music theatre that moves freely between opera, contemporary music, performance art, video, dance, and spoken word. The company collaborates closely with partners including Opera Ballet Vlaanderen, De Singel, Concertgebouw Bruges, and the International Opera Academy, while productions have appeared at festivals including Salzburg, Edinburgh, and the Holland Festival. Its work reflects a particularly contemporary Belgian approach to music theatre, international, collaborative, and stylistically open. Belgium's central position within European opera is reflected not only artistically, but also institutionally. Since 2002, the headquarters of Opera Europa, the network connecting more than 240 opera houses and festivals across over 40 countries, have been based at La Monnaie in Brussels. It is perhaps fitting that such a network is headquartered in Belgium, a multilingual country at the political and cultural crossroads of Europe, where opera has long served as a meeting point between traditions. Which brings us naturally to the present moment. Belgian opera today is defined less by a single tradition than by the meeting and reinvention of many traditions. That is exactly what institutions like La Monnaie continue to represent, a house shaped by history, politics, language, and experimentation, from Lully and revolutionary riots to newly commissioned world premieres like Iain Bell's Medusa. And maybe that is the most Belgian operatic characteristic of all, opera not as a museum, but as a living public conversation.
Mon commissaire ne fait pas, pas de mer.
Opera is often described as an art form built on tradition, but every tradition was once something entirely new, uncertain, risky, and even controversial. Belgium, and in particular La Monnaie in Brussels, has long been one of the places where opera continues to reinvent itself. So, today I wanted to explore how new operas actually come into being, from the first idea and the act of commissioning to the long and often fragile journey towards a world premiere. A world premiere that has just happened at La Monnaie a few days ago. I am joined here on the Opera Road Trip by two people who know this process very intimately. Directly from her office at La Monnaie by Christina Scheppelmann, CEO and Artistic Director of La Monnaie, and by the British composer Iain Bell, who has joined Christina for the world premiere production of his newest opera, Medusa. Welcome to the Opera Road Trip.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Christina, I was thinking before this conversation that all three of us have spent years of trying to convince audiences and boardrooms, institutions, and so on that opera is not a museum art form, each in our own ways. And yet, creating a new opera still feels like an enormous act of optimism. Would you agree?
I would agree with it to a point because I don't think that we're trying to convince anybody. I think we're just doing what we need to do, which is it's a living art form. It's partially, yes, museum, like every museum has, older art and modern art. And I think opera does a little bit the same. I actually find that contemporary opera is more alive in the US. When you look at the amount of operas that have been composed in the US that became repertoire in the US, I think we outdo, I say we because I'm also a little bit American, I think we outdo the European creations that have become repertoire. In order to become repertoire, you have to repeat pieces, you have to do them again. Of course, the creation process is always a lot of work, but I think we've all been long enough in the business, we know how it goes. It's a leap of faith also. It's being convinced that you do something that hopefully is interesting and attractive for the audience, that the ingredients are good. And if you do regularly quality work in your opera company, you have a credibility with your audience. And then when you do something new or something that they don't know yet, you hopefully have built on that credibility that makes the audience then come and say, well, let's see what that is. I mean, it's really a collaboration also with the audience and the trust that you build with the audience that what you do is of quality. And depending where you are, in some cities you can be a little bit more extreme, others less. But then what does extreme mean? I mean, ultimately, we want a piece that has some level of success. We need the audience. I need the audience to at least want to hear it, hopefully also a second time. That's why we do it. If we're trying to scare people away, then I think we're in the wrong business.
Absolutely. Opera houses could survive very comfortably on Mozart, Verdi, Puccini, maybe Wagner. So why continue taking... I like that you're wondering about that and shaking your head. Our audience can't see that yet, but why are we continuing to take artistic and financial risks in creating new operas?
Because that's our job. I mean, plus I don't believe that we could live in eternity with Carmen, Tosca, Butterfly, and Magic Flute. I just don't agree. There is a young audience that has never seen those classics that would be very happy to see those classics to get to know them. But how often can you see the same pieces over and over again? And there are also topics that at some point are not interesting anymore. The music is wonderful. Some operas are truly timeless and some are not. And I think that in this case of Medusa, and also of other operas, it addresses something that has a relevance, had a relevance 2,000 years ago, has a relevance today. It's a topic that does resonate with a lot of young people also come to this piece. I think we need to also think about what is interesting to the audience. What do people think about today that makes them go want to see a story told to music and singing, which what opera is? It's also boring for singers. A lot of singers are bored to sing always the same. A lot of singers have the ambition to do something new, to learn something new, for their own artistic development also.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, I can say that so many singers actually, if we're talking about those singers that are singing the highest rep around the world, when they then actually get the opportunity to have a role written for them, that can indeed, when they're at a state of boredom or just they want to flex other muscles, they find that deeply, deeply exciting and they're engaged in the process, deeply engaged in the process, if you allow them to be.
What comes first in the commissioning process for you? I've asked once because I needed something quickly, and I asked a composer if he had something in the drawer that hadn't been performed yet for whatever reason. But usually, of course, this takes much longer preparation times. But is there sort of a pattern that you use? What comes first? Is it the choice of the composer, the story, feeling that something's missing from the repertoire? There's so many different ways.
As a commissioned composer, I can say that of my 6 operas that have been commissioned, they've all been commissioned in completely different ways. So from being commissioned as my first opera was A Harlot's Progress at Théâtre an der Wien, it was very much a vehicle opera for a star singer. And it was by my affiliation with Diana Damrau that commission was enabled, because she, as I said, was interested, as I alluded to with other singers, in doing something new, and she trusted me, and the Opera House at the time shared her trust. So that's how the first one worked out. I've then, another way it can be, I've had 2 sort of organisational or national commissions. So one was the commission of In Parenthesis from the Welsh National Opera, which was a commemoration of the centenary of the Battle of the Somme, and the other was from New York City Opera, that was Stonewall. And that was an anniversary piece for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. So that's 2 ways. You can then, which is the most wonderful way, is when you have an idea. You have an idea that's burning, that's eating, that's corroding your insides, that needs to come out. And you communicate that with the right people at the right time. And they then say, they press go, they press the green go button. And that's sort of what happened here. So I had an idea that I communicated with Christina, and it just so happened that Christina was then in a position to commission it for La Monnaie.
Yeah. I mean, I've known Iain for several years. We talked about another project, but then never happened. And in this case, I remembered our conversation and I said, let's do it, because I found the topic and also his enthusiasm and his belief in the topic really exciting. You want the composer not to just write another opera, you want the composer to be motivated to write an opera. And Iain was very motivated about this piece. And so I finally said, yeah, let's do it. But very often it's also by chance. I mean, sometimes it happens, you just stumble over something. I also know a composer who has pretty much 3 operas that are already written in the drawer, hoping and looking for ways to get them performed. So I don't believe in, as Iain said, his 6 operas had different avenues. And I don't think that there is one scheme, one way of doing it.
What I think is incumbent on us as composers, when we are lucky enough to be approached about a subject matter that perhaps we weren't thinking about doing an opera about, I find it incumbent on myself to put myself, I have to find a way in. So for instance, when I did my World War I opera, I thought, goodness me, I'm known for writing about Georgian prostitutes. How can I find my way into a World War I piece set in the trenches, which is hyper-masculine and everything I thought I wasn't? But not only does that push you to into another level of musicality and out of your comfort zone. It also, finding that way in makes you fall in love with the material. And I think that's crucial as a composer, that you actually become obsessed, because you're going to spend a lot of time in the company of this piece, of these words, and this sound world. So be obsessed.
At what point does the librettist come in? And again, we will probably have for each opera a different type of process, a different way, right?
I mean, ideally before the music. Facetious answer. But with me, I can only speak for myself, is I need the full libretto from A to Z in a final draft as possible. Of course, there will be words and tweaks, but the dramaturgy, the skeleton of the opera in its most fullest sense, needs to be as complete as humanly possible before I start setting a note. Yeah. I write quite quickly, which means that if I were to wait for someone to be delivering pages, I could be waiting. If that wouldn't be good, I'd be stop starting. It just means I can go at a white heat.
Well, you're missing the arch also. I mean, it cannot go page by page. Yeah. And in this case, I mean, we had talked, I mean, I was interested in offering the production of Lydia Steyer. And then she said to me, after she considered it and she would like to direct it, that she also wanted to write the libretto. And we talked a little bit about it, and turns out we both share a frustration about bad librettos. And I've seen my fair share of operas that really failed because of a bad libretto, without pointing any finger at anybody. It's a difficult art form to write librettos. So I said, yeah, let's do it. And then, of course, I needed to make sure that Lydia and Iain would somehow like each other. And so
So go play, children, go play.
So go play. I said, go get to know each other, hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that they wouldn't start fighting right away. And then then they talked, And I mean, I wasn't part of that.
It was the most organic process. And to see Lydia, even before she came on board as librettist, fall in love, and I'll use the term again, get obsessed with the subject matter. And she did. She was really becoming consumed in a way I recognised by the material. I knew we would get a good libretto from her, because she'd fallen in love with the storytelling. And by her being the beginning point as librettist and the end point as director, I think that actually afforded the piece a unity, a manufactural unity, if I may coin that phrase, if that's ever been used before, because I'm just the guy in the middle that does the middle bit. And to have someone then overseeing the first bit and feasibly knowing what she is saying as librettist can be decorated and can be applied to the stage, I think was a real bonus.
have just listened to the overture of Medusa, Iain Bell's newest opera, performed by the orchestra and chorus of La Monnaie in Brussels. We inherited an almost intimidating history and wealth of operatic creations, styles and traditions. Iain, did you ever feel paralyzed by that weight when you started writing?
No, and look, Sebastian, you're actually part of something that disrobed me of any paralysis. I had A Harlot's Progress premiering in Theater an der Wien in Vienna when you were there, Sebastian.
I remember, yes.
And right before me, you programmed the Rake's Progress. So I haven't had any fear. It was just, oh, do you know what? I've just got to do it. I've just got to do the best I can with what I've got. And be authentic to myself as I can. I think that's the key, actually, without being silly and without joking. All jokes aside, you have to believe in the voice that you have and the story you want to tell and the way you want to tell it. All I can hope for when I go into a contemporary opera is that they have their own voice, that they have an authenticity about their delivery. That's all I want from you. So I know that Sariaho's music, I recognise her within the first 4 bars. You know, that's what I want from contemporary opera. And that's what I want from contemporary composers. And then ideally, something that just goes. Something that just takes me and I don't feel the need to fidget. Yeah.
Finding your own voice, and also looking forward, not trying to... I think what Iain has done, looking in the tradition as far as vocal technique is concerned, is a fantastic curiosity in order to then be able to apply it in what you write. But find your own voice. Look forward. Don't look sideways. Don't look back. I always say the only constant in life is change. And change means you need to look forward. What stories are relevant today? What stories do I want to tell? How do I want this to sound? How do I think I can move or touch or scare an audience today with what sounds? Let's do something that is music and a story for today. Nobody can compete with Mozart and Da Ponte, and it's also pointless. That's in the past. They are still phenomenal. We recognize their mastery, but we need to move forward. We want the art form to be there still in 100 years. Let's move forward. It's how I see it. That's what I find. I find it exciting to listen to new pieces. Some I like, some I don't, of course.
And I think to that, the only way me as a composer, feel that I can move forward. I know I do my best work when I am scared. I don't mean in a fearful way that is I can't do this. It's how am I going to do this? This is new. This is going to push me. This
adrenaline rush. Scared.
There you go. Thrilled, and a kind of white knuckled. And I think that as artists, if we feel that white knuckle grip, that will also ideally push us over a threshold into something new. So we ourselves aren't then just part of a production line style of writing, or that we're not repeating ourselves.
What role does the human voice play in writing operas today? As a former singer, and of course because of my role here at La Scala, where we're also commissioning and therefore casting new operas, I'm professionally interested in sustainable singing and a long-term health-oriented use of the instrument voice. What role does the voice play, or what role should it play?
I talk with many composers in the conservatory that never learn about the instrument voice. So there is also that link missing of how does the voice really work? How does it work together with the word? And how do I, as a composer, him, as a composer, work with the librettist? How do the words work?
And then I think another level on that is actually how do I orchestrate around a voice?
Yeah.
How do I give the voice space, but while also creating a texture which is luxurious and symphonic? There are so many layers to being an opera composer that, as you say, are sometimes untaught.
Yeah.
Or you learn them on the job.
Sometimes I've heard composers say, singers don't want to sing contemporary pieces. It's like, I don't agree with that statement. No. You as a composer have a responsibility to know the voice, to know what the instrument voice is. It's the most versatile instrument, hard to pinpoint. And
also the most fragile.
The most fragile. A tenor is not a tenor is not a tenor. And a composer should learn this before they start writing for the voice.
Whilst also writing something that is thrilling and hopefully exciting for the singer. So you don't also want to write something that's pedestrian. There's a line where you can actually create something that does keep both the singer and the audience on the edge whilst not being dangerous. You're still working with the voice, not against it. And the reason why I was able to do that is by working with star singers, as I did from a very young age. The only way I felt I could do so and look them in the eye and say, this is for you, was by studying vocal technique, was by studying the Garcia bel canto method. Not to sing, but no, never to sing, but so I need a theory about vowel placement, about the difference between range and tessitura. So that is the difference between the highest note and the lowest note, and also where the voice sits comfortably. That often is something that's not fully appreciated by composers because they're not taught it. It's no fault of their own. They perhaps don't know that that's a thing. So it was in immersing myself within that mid-19th century Italian tradition, and then repertoire as well, knowing repertoire, so knowing the difference between a Verdi dramatic soprano and a Wagner one, or a Rossini mezzo soprano, those things. It's falling in love with what's already there, falling in love with the tradition, and then adding your own self to it. For instance, when we had the cast meetings about casting Medusa, I like to work with new singers on every big project like this because it forces me to engage with different voices, which are all idiosyncratic, and potentially different voice types that I wouldn't necessarily be engaging with. So, and then you can end up with something that's quite thrilling because within Medusa itself, we have 6 roles for women. We have women in this opera who would never be cast in the same opera together. There's no repertoire that exists that would enable 4 of 6 of these women to be in the same opera, let alone 6 of them. We have Anna Sfogato, extraordinarily high soprano in Anno Comsi. We have Mary Elizabeth Williams, who's singing a hochdramatique role that's Abigail meets Brunhilde. You then have a Lucia di Lama, more central character, and then Angela Denoke and Paula Mari, a dramatic and a lyric mezzo, and these are all big roles. These are all important roles. So I think that thrill of engaging with the new all the time is so important and can reap so much fruit.
This seems to be the right moment to share with our listeners another excerpt from Iain's new opera. This is an aria for Medusa herself from this world premiere run at La Monnaie. We could have continued our talk about creating new opera and about this new Medusa by Iain Bell for hours, but there is limited time in our podcast, and I want to make sure our listeners can rather go and watch the stream of Medusa here on OperaVision for another few months. I wish Medusa a long life and many new productions and many curious singers to bring their own interpretations and voices to this exciting new opera. I thank today's guests, Christina Scheppelmann and Iain Bell, for their captivating insights. I thank Palazzetto Bruzzane for our 3 excerpts from Belgian composers, as well as the OperaVision team for their support. I must not forget to invite you also to have a look at the other interesting contributions from opera houses across the globe made available to you on operavision.eu. There is, of course, as mentioned, the Medusa from La Monnaie, a Nutcracker from Tokyo, a Tannhäuser from Zagreb, Romeo et Juliette from Rome, or a Norma from Dublin, to name just a few. My bonus track for you at the end of today's episode is a duet from Hulda, an opera by César Franck from 1885, based on a gripping Norwegian medieval legend. I hope you will join me again for our next episode a month from now. This series is curated, edited and presented by me, Sebastian Schwarz. OperaVision is supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union in the framework of the Opera Europa Next Generation platform. Until next time, keep singing, keep questioning, and take care.